Yes, when you look at political risk, I could see two. I mean, there are loads, but two that that has direct impact on the economy: U.S. presidential election and Brexit. My question to you is, what's the most difficult to predict? And then, Rick, what's the most difficult to model? Tina.
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it. And we have identified those two events as the top political signposts. Of course, in our report, we also talk about convergence risk between old geopolitics and new socioeconomics. But they both are reflected to some extent in who is going to sit in the White House next. Now, the U.S. has a very complex system, which not only it mystifies outsiders, but many in the United States. And we've been going through the primary process. And against what pundits expected, it is looking like Donald Trump may get the Republican nomination. Now, coming on the back of the elections last year, I think we have to be prepared for these kinds of outsiders and to think about what they might mean for markets. The UK referendum, of course, is not only important for UK PLC, but the example that it sets and the inspiration it's providing to others in Europe, and the extent that it may influence the unraveling of Europe.
Can we believe the polls? Both seem so emotional, right? Especially in this day of age, because they're, I guess, more extreme views that maybe we had even 3-4 years ago. How do you model them?
Well, it's a brave person who says they believe the polls these days after what we've seen the last several elections. How do you model it? I think you model it by thinking about your risk budget very carefully. And reining in risks where you really have no certainty. And I think people demand a risk premium for holding sterling, so we've seen sterling obviously decline in value. But I'd add to that stack of risks. If you think about Germany and the migration crisis that's going to unfold later this year, and this relative weakening of Angela Merkel's position, I think that's a pretty significant political risk at the heart of Europe, and kind of compounds the Brexit risk.
We talk about that in our new report, too, Merkel exit, we call it.
Tina, to come back to Brexit, and then I know Francine wants to pick up on the Merkel theme. A color for me in the United Kingdom, the engaged public anger on Brexit. When I look at the newspapers, it looks like a clinical exercise of elites. Is there a Trump-Sanders-like anger to this debate about the future of the United Kingdom with Europe, and for that matter, with Scotland?
Well, to a certain extent, I think part of what we see is how the benefits of European Union membership are really taken for granted and priced in to a certain extent. I mean, as an anecdote, I gave a talk yesterday to a group of sixth formers, that's kind of 16-year-olds in the UK, and the whole conversation was about immigration. So I think this is what they're talking about at home. So the economic aspects and benefits of being in the EU, perhaps not as appreciated by the public.
Well, then, Tina, within your new report, give us an update. You know, I think of your former work with Ian Bremmer at Eurasia Group and now what you're doing at Citigroup. I mean, I'm curious about the new dynamic of the migrant-refugee debate.
It clearly influences the atmosphere and the optics, and although the UK is not obliged, in fact, under its current arrangements to take refugees, this sense of chaos in Europe and the better off out notion, I think are very much accelerated by scenes of chaos. And that's why, of course, the Prime Minister wanted to avoid having the referendum in the autumn when we expect another wave of refugees, right? So having it in June, helps mitigate the sense of another deluge in the summer, the so-called summer sailing season. But this is all very short-term political concerns. There's also a risk at the extent to which this is being played out in the British press as a battle between two old Etonian university chums, making it part of the X-factorization of politics. This has a huge impact on Europe. In fact, even if the UK votes to stay, I think that this referendum and the negotiation process will have a big impact on the future of Europe.
This is difficult, right? Because this is emotional, right? You look at the tabloids, and I'm going to New York. I'm going to bring some tabloids over for Tom Keaton. He'll go, "What? Is this what they're writing?" But it's actually quite difficult because we don't know what happens if the UK does leave the EU, and it's very difficult to pinpoint the mood at the moment of the people. Is this a vote? Could it be a vote against David Cameron?
No, I think there'll be a grassroots element that's influenced by the tabloids and concerned about migration issues. But what will be key is what the turnout looks like, because those who get incredibly jazzed up about these issues, that they're going to roll out. But as you say, there are a lot of people who take maybe the benefits of the European Union for granted. And the question for those who want pro-EU is how do they motivate those people to come out? And the scare tactics may work. very short-term pain, but long-term, better being in the EU.
Can we trust the polls at all, Tina? Do we have to look at actually how the campaign is being positioned, right? We're just at the early start. So Boris Johnson came out at the weekend.
The campaign's just starting. I mean, you saw Sterling sell-off on Monday because...
And Tuesday.
And Tuesday because there was a credible figure, right? Boris Johnson being the most popular politician in the UK. Does he matter to non-metropolitan elites? We don't know yet. We've got very little polling data post the Prime Minister's deal from Brussels on Friday and post, what do we call it, Brexit, Boris Johnson's announcement on Sunday night. So we need to see how the polls adjust. But it's quite clear that the edge for Leave has been building for some time.